Some prehistoric giant.
Very large, and they're certainly more than big enough to represent a danger to us.
And the secret to even larger size may lurk in their ancient DNA. Code for a truly monstrous Croczilla.
The propensity to become a giant is always present in the crocodilian lineages.
I think the conditions are ready right now for a super croc.
$65 million years ago, a devastating extinction event wiped out most of the Earth's reptile giants. Today, one massive-bodied beast remains.
They avoided the extinction that nipped the dinosaurs in the bud, leaving only birds as descendants. It's really an incredible success story.
They're one of evolution's most incredible survivors, revered by some as gods, reviled by others as man-eaters.
So never underestimate a crocodile in the water. If you get too close to it, then really, that's the end of it.
Meet the world's largest reptile, the crocodile.
They might not be quite as long as some of the giant snakes, but they're actually a lot heavier than those giant snakes, so they are actually the biggest reptiles on Earth.
These prehistoric giants can grow to enormous sizes, yet fossil evidence reveals their ancient relatives grew even larger.
If you go back 100 million years, there were crocodiles that were almost twice the size, and probably about 4 to 5 times the weight of the biggest crocodiles today.
In the late 1990s, paleontologists working in the Sahara Desert unearthed the bones of the largest crocodile ever known to roam the Earth, Super Croc.
Super croc is the nickname. Sarcosuchus imperator, the imperial flesh croc. That is the technical name.
Super Croc was probably 40 feet long. It would have been an absolute monster.
Scientists think Super Croc, like today's crocs, was a powerful predator stalking unsuspecting prey at the water's edge.
And Sarcosuchus was doing the same sort of things as these modern crocodiles are doing, except it was doing it 100 million years ago.
Millions of years later, a modern croc still hunts like Super Croc and hunts similar habitat. Yet can it grow to its ancient ancestors' gargantuan size? How big can it get? Here in Darwin, in Australia's Northern Territory, one potential Croczilla candidate dominates the region's tidal rivers and estuaries. Known locally as salties, these are the largest of the world's 23 species of crocodilians, saltwater crocodiles. The largest saltwater crocodile ever measured stretched over 6 meters long. Yet to outlast dinosaurs, you need more than monster size. You need a heavy-duty arsenal of survival traits. Salties have thick, armor-plated skin, muscular limbs, strong jaws lined with over 60 bone-crushing teeth, and powerful tails extending almost half their body length. It's one possible clue to their future size potential, honed to perfection by evolution. Crocodiles' bodies are designed to survive.
I mean, they could lose a limb, it doesn't matter. The dominant males are often missing a limb. You have an animal that's a survivor, and there's almost nothing that can get in its way.
It's almost like a Ferrari now. It's had so much refinement done to the general body plan of a crocodile that what you've got now is you've got, like, you know, the best possible crocodile that you could possibly have.
Salty is your A1 predator, something to watch out for. They eat humans every year.
Very large, and they're certainly more than big enough to represent a danger to us.
News accounts report lethal attacks. In rural Darwin in 2009, while swimming with her sister and 2 friends near a swamp called the Black Jungle. An 11-year-old girl vanishes. Police mount a ground search for the girl. Helicopters scan the bush from the air. The next day, they find her remains. Bite marks indicate her killer was a crocodile, measuring about 3.5 meters. Trained crocodile catcher Robbie Risk was part of the search team.
That was a really emotional event. And that took about a day to find any remains. When we did, you know, it was something that, you know, you don't really want in your head.
Groups of armed officers scour the area, setting traps throughout the floodplain, but they never find the culprit croc. Though attacks like this are rare, salties probably kill about 6 people a year. Yet officials estimate there are up to 150,000 of them moving from rural tidal rivers into Darwin waters.
The unique thing about Darwin is that it's essentially a city that's situated right in the middle of crocodile habitat.
And as they spread to urban and suburban areas, the odds of attacks on humans may be increasing exponentially.
If most crocodiles in the tidal rivers here didn't move, they'd get killed by other crocodiles. There's just not enough food and there's not enough space to go around. And this is why you've got saltwater crocodiles moving along the coast towards Darwin. And more crocodiles every year are found in and around Darwin. And obviously the potential for disaster is so much higher.
Accidental run-ins with wild crocodiles are an ever-present danger here. But there's an even more dangerous phenomenon. Rogue crocs that attack people on purpose.
Rogue crocodiles don't behave like normal crocodiles, and they represent a really very significant danger. Often rogue crocodiles are the kinds of animals which have successfully attacked someone. They realize how easy it is, and then they try and do the same thing again. And very much unlike other crocodiles, which tend to stay away from people, rogue crocodiles will try and seek people out.
Rogue crocodile is a problem crocodile. It's just got attitude and does, you know, wants to kill everything, really.
To reduce the risk of an attack by a rogue or other saltwater crocodile, Darwin authorities operate an ongoing catch and remove management program.
We've caught over 170 crocs this year, compared to last year, which was about 140. So we have actually caught a fair bit this year. Might even break the record. What we're doing here is just checking and rebaiting the trap.
Croc catchers like Robbie monitor over 60 movable traps. They keep them baited, and when they find crocs inside, they remove them, mark them, and record their size. The largest salty Robbie's ever caught measured over 4.5 meters. But any size croc can do some damage.
3 meters, 4 meters can actually crush skulls and stuff like that.
When you work with crocodiles, you have to be very respectful of what they're capable of. And if it goes wrong, that's when you lose your hand, that's when you lose your arm, that's where potentially you could lose your life.
Today, crocodile specialist Dr. Adam Britton is riding along with Robbie. He's collecting DNA to help create a genetic map of Darwin's crocodiles.
What we're doing is we're taking tissue samples from crocodiles that we're catching in Darwin Harbour, and we're comparing them with tissue samples from crocodiles that we're going to be collecting across the northern coast of Australia. And what that's going to do, hopefully, is tell us a little bit about where the crocodiles that are moving into Darwin Harbour are actually coming from.
Dr. Britton's map may someday pinpoint a breeding colony of giants. But for now, his research is geared toward keeping the peace between humans and a potentially deadly crocodile species.
What we can learn about these crocodiles is why they're moving and what's motivating them to move. And if there's a risk of crocodile attack, then you have to try and reduce that risk. And hopefully we can figure out how to make it safer for people. And then people will be more likely to put up with crocodiles that live on their doorstep.
Well, here we are at number 2 trap in Darwin Harbour. Just going to give it a pull. As you can see, I've just tested the trap. The croc comes in. As he comes into the trap itself, he'll actually pull down on the meat, the bait, which triggers the door as old. So it's a pretty simple mechanism and it works pretty efficiently. All right, off to the next trap.
As the team heads off to check the next trap, they can only guess what size beast will take the bait. A crocodile can grow as long as it lives. It's another clue to their future size potential. When most creatures mature, they reach a maximum size and growth stops. But crocodile size has no limits. It's a phenomenon known as indeterminate growth. In captivity, with a steady food supply and fewer survival challenges, crocodiles may be able to live longer and grow larger than crocs in the wild.
These animals pretty much grow until the day that they die, so it is possible that these animals are going to reach much greater sizes in captivity than they normally would in the wild.
One of the largest captive crocs ever recorded, a saltwater crocodile named ᴅᴏᴄᴜᴍᴇ, lived here at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm Zoological Park in Florida. ᴅᴏᴜᴜᴜ maxed out at over 17 feet, weighing nearly a ton. He became a main attraction, drawing audiences to his feeding shows in droves. Today, his supersized legacy lives on in another huge salty named Maximo.
So he's over 15 feet long, 1,200 pounds. He's an incredibly powerful animal.
Working with carnivores as large as Maximo carries extreme risks. Zoo staff is always cautious.
I said he looks at us as a potential food source, so we certainly need to watch out for that. He's surprisingly quick for an animal his size. You can see the power in this animal when he jumps up after a rat. It's just something you really don't want to get too close to.
Maximo's size may be what draws onlookers to his enclosure. Yet like other crocodilians, his most remarkable trait may be intelligence.
Crocs are definitely the smartest of all the reptiles. They have the most well-developed cerebral cortex of any reptile, and they're a lot smarter than people think they are.
Crocodilians have a reptile-sized brain. I mean, it's literally the size of a walnut. And yet, they are incredibly smart animals for what they need to do. And some of what they do is pretty spectacular.
In the wild, crocs seem to have an eye for detail. They can read their surroundings and respond by changing their behavior.
You can go into an environment, be observed by crocodiles that you never see, and you will never see them again. They didn't see you. They didn't like the way your clothes were. They didn't like the way you moved. They didn't like your boat. They hadn't seen your boat on the river. They noticed something was up. You will never find them again.
They may also display some form of memory.
To be a crocodile, you want to know where the best place to hunt is going to be on a day-to-day basis. And you can't just stumble upon it every day. You have to remember, you have to learn.
And here in captivity, some crocodilians, like this alligator named Bomber, seem to show thinking.
You tap him on the snout, he'll open up, throw a nugget of food in there, and he'll slam shut on it. He gets a meal and somehow realizes that you want him to do that. The first time he'll do the trick just fine. The next time he'll move back about 2 inches. The next time about 4 inches. So he'll keep moving back. And what he's doing is, it seems to be that he's trying to lure you into the water to the point where you'll fall in. And God knows what he wants to do with you from there. This animal is thinking. I mean, this is a learned behavior.
These ancient survivors are more than creatures of pure instinct, and Maximo's no exception.
He's learned a routine for the show, and he knows time of day. So if we walk up onto that platform right at 3 o'clock, he starts going through his routine that he has to go through for the feeding show. So that didn't take him very long to learn it all.
Maximo!
He was trained to kind of a 3-tap cue, so if you kind of pound the boardwalk 3 times, he'll still react to that. A lot more intelligent than most people probably give him credit for.
Smart, powerful, huge, and still growing. Maximo's just 40 years old. At 4.5 meters, 544 kilos, he can grow for decades. Only time will tell how much bigger he can get.
It looks like we've got a croc in this trap. Yeah, be about 2.5 meters.
Back in Darwin, the team finds a salty in one of the harbor traps. Robbie estimates it's about 2.5 meters.
First, what we're going to do is chuck a snout rope over a top jaw, and then we're going to disable his jaws with a zip tie, and then we'll bring him out of the top of the cage.
They have to get it onto the boat, but first, they have to secure its jaws. To get the croc to open its mouth, the croc catcher taps it on the snout. He slips a snout rope around its upper jaw. But the noose is caught on the croc's upper teeth.
Just got to bring it back a bit more.
You don't want it flipping off at the last minute.
Nah.
Finally, the noose slips over the teeth and into position around the upper jaw.
Now I'll jump on the trap and I'll disable the jaws with a zip tie, so we don't get close enough to the croc ourselves. So there's no interactions between us and the animal itself, so no one's going to get hurt. Now what we're going to do now is just duct tape his jaws together and then cover his eyes.
Covering its eyes helps minimize stress.
Eyes covered, jaws are secured. Now we're ready to bring him out of the trap. And just securing his back legs, where they get most of their power from. The final part, just a bit of protection there from his other teeth that are protruding over the top jaw. So when we do handle him, we won't cut our hands up and stuff.
Even with the croc's jaws zip-tied and taped, with one swing of its head, its large teeth can tear open human flesh.
Yep.
With a wild salty captured for relocation, Robbie and the team loaded onto the boat.
Stop. Beautiful.
When the croc's secure, the team ties new bait, resets the trap, and heads off to check the next one. Here in Queensland, Australia, in the rivers and swamps surrounding Cooktown, some fear croc populations and attacks may be on the rise. In 2005, a crocodile measuring nearly 4 meters dragged a fisherman from his canoe and killed him. Park rangers located the croc and shot it. More recently, in 2008, on the banks of the Endeavour River, when a 62-year-old man left his campsite to check his crab pots and failed to return, his wife called authorities. Once on scene, they find crocodile slide marks down the riverbank. A full-scale search turns up one of the man's sandals and watch. Weeks later, authorities discover the man's remains inside a 4.2-meter croc. Experts say attacks like these are just freak accidents, but some locals worry. If crocs continue to spread to areas inhabited by humans, more fatal encounters may be inevitable. In Florida, at the St. Augustine Alligator Farm, biologist Dr. Gregory Erickson is studying a crocodile's main predatory tool, its bite.
We're trying to understand what makes these animals tick. We're interested in how the musculature and the mechanics of the jaws allow them to generate their bite forces, and how the shapes and sizes of the teeth contribute to the pressures that these animals use to make a living. These are our bite force transducers. When it bites down on this, it's going to exert a force, and this is a 4-sensor device, like a good bathroom scale, and it's going to send out a signal to a charge amplifier that's going to record the bite force.
He starts by prepping a specially designed bite force meter.
The meter's leather padded so it doesn't hurt their teeth. And as soon as you touch one of their teeth, it triggers a snapping bite, is what we call it, and they'll slam down, apparently with as much force as they can possibly generate, and we'll get a recording instantly of what the maximal bite force was. I'm not exactly sure what this Nile crocodile is going to do. They tend to be rather surly animals.
Together with curator Kevin Torregrossa and another park staffer, Dr. Erickson enters the croc enclosure.
She's a mad motor scooter.
The crocodile fights, rolling and wrapping itself in the rope.
Leave him right there.
But finally, the team lifts the croc out of the water and onto an examination board.
What we're going to do is throw the board in. I'm going to push the jaws down on the board. You're going to put the mouthful on to hold his jaws on the board, and we're going to tape it up.
I hate that part.
A wooden block props open the animal's jaws and prevents it from clamping down.
Right there would be good.
Okay, cinch it down, tight.
What I'm doing is I'm taking dental putty. It's essentially the same material your dentist uses to cast your teeth when you're going in for dental work. And I'm going to use this to make some copies of the more prominent teeth in this animal. Don't do this at home. Don't do this with your pet crocodile. Or your dog, for that matter.
Before taking bite force readings, Dr. Erickson takes dental impressions.
By making molds of the teeth, then we can make casts of them, and essentially we can walk away with a replica of the teeth. From that, we can do studies as to how much pressure they actually generate at the tips of their teeth. But we really don't understand how the teeth work, and so that's what we're trying to do in this research. I hate doing this. It's not a natural thing to do, to put your hand in the mouth of a crocodile. It's for the cause, I guess. This will sit in about 5 minutes, and so we'll be able to pop that right off and hopefully get this animal back in the water as soon as possible.
Another clue to crocodile's future size potential: predatory skill.
Crocodiles are classic ambush predators. In other words, they stalk silently and attack rapidly. They can hide in a river with just a nostril and an eyeball sticking above the water and prey on something that has no idea what's about to happen.
Crocodiles are masters of their habitat. To hunt, they often just sit and wait.
All animals have to have water, and so you've got a constant source of food coming to you, and all you have to do is get good at catching it.
It doesn't really matter who the players are coming to the water's edge. The crocodile doesn't care as long as it's a meal.
Hidden with its eyes, ears, and nostrils sticking just above the water's surface, a crocodile can use its powerful senses to home in on prey.
They have these pressure receptors around their jaw, and literally they can detect changes in pressure through the water. They have an excellent sense of smell. They can smell animals and prey from quite a long distance away, and it could be several kilometers away. Their hearing's actually better than ours at low frequencies, and so they can hear the rustle of footsteps. They can hear animals moving through grass. Their eyesight is excellent too. They've got full color vision and they can see at night very effectively.
Once locked onto a target, a croc approaches unseen, propelled by its powerful tail.
It's the driving force that allows them to be able to swim at great speeds, but more importantly, to slowly swim without creating a lot of turbulence.
And if they see something come close to the water, they'll swim underwater for a distance, and then they'll come up a little bit closer, and they'll have another look, and they'll see what the situation is. And they'll keep getting closer and closer, and all that prey item has to do is get sufficiently close to the crocodile, and as soon as that happens, bang, that's it, it's all over.
Launching an explosive surprise attack, a crocodile bites down with bone-crushing force, dragging its victim into the water to drown it. Sometimes it goes into a death roll.
The crocodile may roll to try to disorient the prey item. Sometimes the animal's dismembered at that point. Maybe the animal will die nearby from bleeding. Ideally, the crocodile's trying to drown the prey item. Once the animal's drowned, of course, then it's secured a meal.
Once its prey is dead, a crocodile uses its body to tear it to pieces.
They just simply rip it apart with a motion of their head. They're like a tube of muscle, a little bit of flexibility, especially in the neck region, the armor. There's a little break in the armor there, so it can just yank its head back and forth and just literally rip limbs and bodies apart.
Gravity helps it swallow.
Okay, let's see if this is all it seems to be.
Back in Florida, Dr. Erickson removes the dental putty from a nearly 2.5-meter crocodile's tooth.
This animal's really powerful. You saw right there, just touching that tooth set this animal off. They're a lot faster than we are, so you have to be careful. I mean, if we hadn't had that mouth taped shut, I'd be heading for the hospital right now. You never want to reach down into this area. We call it the hitting zone. Got a really nice mold here of the malariform teeth as well. And so we'll take these back to the lab and we'll make some replicas of this crocodile's teeth.
Okay, now tighten it up.
With molds removed, Dr. Erickson prepares to measure the croc's bite force.
Here we go. Oh, missed it. Just missed it. Okay, so what happened? Here's the croc saw the bar coming.
They try again, hoping for a more direct hit.
There you go.
We'll just have to
Take operation.
all right. 375. Yeah, this animal's starting to tire a little bit, and so that's probably all we're going to get.
Yeah.
Roughly 400 pounds of force. With full energy, it's potentially capable of even greater forces. And as it grows, so will its bite.
Got it. Just let him run all the way back. Gotta make it easy. All right, Dave. Good job. Back to his corner.
As the team releases the croc, it races off. Dr. Erickson will take his molds, bite force readings, and measurements back to the lab for analysis.
With the bigger crocodiles, such as the saltwater crocodiles, we're getting numbers approaching 4,000 pounds. Almost twice what we see in the spotted hyena, which is the bone-crushing champion among mammals. It's also twice as high as what you see in the Bengal tiger or an African lion.
Over 1,800 kilos of force eclipses any animal on the planet. Dr. Erickson believes the huge force is necessary for its survival.
Most crocodiles don't have particularly sharp teeth. They're blunt instruments, not well designed for puncturing things. But with the kind of forces these animals generate, they are able to produce pressures that are high enough to puncture through hide and sustain impacts with bones. And they pull it off, and they've been doing it for a long time. And they're pretty good at it.
Back in Darwin, after finding a second croc in a harbor trap, Robbie and his partner transfer their catches to a truck.
Measure them up. And then identification numbered. We always keep the heads up just to stop them from, regurgitating. And then they could drown because, their jaws have been taped up. This is a receipt book here. This is what goes to the croc farm, and we keep the other half. Record the sex and how we actually caught them, and also the size of the animal. The feature for these two crocs here are decided by the croc farm who we give them to. Being one a female, a fairly large one, they'll use for a breeder, where the other one is a male, they'll probably use for a skin product and or meat product. Yeah, two less out of the harbour for us to worry about, which is good. I'm glad we got them, and there's plenty more to catch.
Another clue to crocodiles' future size potential? They're one of nature's most adaptable animals, capable of feeding on a wide range of prey, from small fish to beasts as big as kangaroos.
They're feeding on things such as clams and crustaceans and even insects, fish, frogs, you name it, turtles. They're able to feed upon a broad range if the opportunity presents itself, or if they're forced to do so just due to diminishing resources.
Crocodiles can also adjust their behavior to their environment, especially if they locate a good food opportunity.
And when crocodiles see an opportunity, they'll come back the next day, and if the same opportunity is there, they'll come back the next day, and they will learn very quickly that this is the place to be if you want to have any chance of catching food. But they can do even better than that. They can learn timings. They can learn, for example, that if a migration is happening during September or during April of a certain species of fish or a certain species of mammal, and that's the best time to catch them, you can guarantee that a couple of weeks before it happens, the crocodiles will start migrating into that area.
And if food isn't available, they can go months without eating. When they finally do eat, they use food efficiently, converting it into energy for growth. Crocodiles' extreme adaptability has helped them survive, while other species have gone extinct. Today, they remain the planet's last truly massive reptile. But recent fossil discoveries reveal a lineage of even larger crocodilians. In the 1990s, paleontologist Paul Sereno and a team of researchers stumble upon the find of a lifetime, the ultimate killerzilla, Sarcosuchus imperator, super croc.
Back about 15 years ago, I set foot in the Sahara. It was an exciting and very difficult expedition to try and open a Pandora's box of dinosaurs. But what was really eye-opening was the crocodiles. And in fact, the very first bone I found belonged to super croc. Then we found the skull. To see a 6-foot skull, something that is longer than you are when you lay down next to it, and realize that that's a crocodile, it is amazing. I mean, we marveled at it when we were in the field.
Roughly 110 million years ago, super crocs stalked the banks of a river, coursing through what is now arid land.
Super croc was an ultimate stealth predator, ambush predator. It had enormously powerful jaws and teeth that were like stubs. They were like hooks. They were definitely not designed for eating fish. They were designed for eating dinosaurs. They were designed for pulling dinosaurs down to the water, drowning them, ripping them apart. And the tail is like I don't know, it's like the trunk of a sequoia. It's too big to wrap your arms around. It's absolutely monstrous.
They probably had bite forces perhaps as high as 20,000 pounds or something like that, and God knows what kind of pressures they were generating.
In his lab at the University of Chicago, Dr. Sereno continues to marvel at Super Croc's fossilized skull.
This is the most complete skull of a giant Super Croc ever found. It's 6 feet long, weighs about 700 pounds. The back end of the skull is here. Here's the two eye sockets. They're sort of raised up. Here's the snout. Here's the big opening for the nose. The animal is basically a magazine of teeth. This is the root. The dark part is the crown. This is the part that sticks out. This is a replacement tooth. So most of the tooth is actually in the jaw. When you put this into the skull, you realize that the snout is like a machine gun of teeth. There's teeth going down to each side, filling the snout, and they're being replaced all the time as they break off and wear. Just from the teeth, you can tell quite a bit about what the animal was eating, and this is not a fish-eating tooth. So this is the skull of a very large living crocodile. It's about 2 feet long, and this would be a crocodile that might be 17, 18 feet long. You can see how it pales into insignificance compared to this monster Super Croc skull. But they're designed very similarly.
So, how big was Super Croc?
They're about twice the size of the largest saltwater crocodiles, and probably somewhere in the region of about 10 times as heavy.
Well, we think Super Croc was 40 feet long as a full adult. Yes, a croc the size of a school bus. How much did it weigh? 8 tons is a good estimate. The largest crocodile to ever survive on Earth.
In Australia, croc catcher Robbie Risk and his partner are relocating 2 saltwater crocodiles from Darwin Harbour to a nearby croc farm.
Ah, here they are in their new home.
Here we go, yeah.
So, 2 nice crocs.
Yep.
2 very
Nice ones.
crocs.
One female, one male.
Oh, female, eh?
Yeah, one feet
Oh,
there.
they'll be very pleased with that.
Yep. We'll just lift them up and put them straight in. 2, 3.
I've got the light in.
Nice. 1, 2, 3.
With the crocs off the truck, Robbie heads back to the harbor to continue his work monitoring the traps.
Right, now there's a bit they're not going to like. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take a tissue sample from this crocodile. These
Dr.
tail
Britton
screws
hopes
here.
the tissue
You see
samples will
Robbie's already
yield genetic
taken
material for his DNA map of Darwin's croc population.
And this is basically just cartilage, but it's got some genetic tissue in it. So what I'm going to do is use one of these biopsy punches and just take a bit of that tissue and store it in one of these vials. And then we're going to do some analysis on it to find out if we can determine where this crocodile came from. This is actually the first time I've used this technique. Okay, that worked a bit better. Obviously stings a little bit, but for these crocodiles, they've got such thick skin. It's probably a bit like us having an injection. So that's the sample I've taken. It's just basically a hole through the scoot, and it's just connective tissue really, but we can get some genetic information from this. Stick it in there. So we can keep this for however long we need to, and then we send these down to the lab along with lots of others, and we should get some really useful information out of it.
Armed with his DNA data, his research may one day uncover where Darwin's saltwater crocs are breeding, why they're moving, and how expanding into new habitat may help them grow to even larger sizes. With bodies built to survive, predatory expertise, indeterminate growth, and extreme adaptability, can today's saltwater crocodiles become tomorrow's super crocs?
I think the conditions are ready right now for a super croc. In warm climates, the very largest river systems, I think, could support a huge crocodile.
Temperature is certainly a factor for growth. These animals do have a fairly slow metabolism, but if the weather's warmer, they're going to be eating a lot more. It certainly could help them grow a lot larger.
Warming temperatures and large prey may drive crocodiles to even greater sizes.
If large prey evolved near the water's edge, I think it's quite plausible, possibly even likely, that giant crocodiles would evolve again.
But experts say there's one primary key to reaching the size of super croc: prolonged adolescence.
And what we found is that these animals took about, 35 to 40 years before they started slowing down their growth. Large crocodiles today, somewhere between 12 and 15 years, they'll start slowing down their growth. These giants was, maturing later and living a lot longer.
How did super croc get so big, 40 feet in length? Did it grow faster, or did it grow over a longer period of time? They just took longer to grow.
These giant crocodiles were growing at comparable rates to big crocodiles today. So they didn't necessarily grow faster, they just prolonged sort of their teenage years.
With the right circumstances and an extended adolescence, modern crocs may someday morph into future giants.
Body size is one of the easiest things for evolution to change. Just a handful of genes, a couple of glands going on and off at different times, and you can enlarge yourself beyond what you once were.
What happened during crocodilian evolution is on about 6, 7, maybe even 8 occasions. Crocodile lineages reach gigantic proportions, animals 35 feet or more. The propensity to become a giant is always present in the crocodilian lineages.
Life is not constant, life will change. And it may be possible that in the future, something as large and impressive and awesome as Sarcosuchus might one day exist again.
So, how big can it get? If future salties size up to super croc proportions, this is what a croczilla might look like. A fearsome predator clocking in at more than 12 meters, 7,000 kilograms. With a tail almost 5 meters long, a near 2-meter skull, teeth like railroad spikes, and jaws capable of biting down with over 9,000 kilos of pure predatory force. One colossal example of how big it can get. They find her remains. Bite marks indicate her killer was a crocodile, measuring about 3.5 meters. Trained crocodile catcher Robbie Risk was part of the search team.
That was a really emotional event. And that took about a day to find any remains. When we did, it was something that you don't really want in your head.
Groups of armed officers scour the area, setting traps throughout the floodplain, but they never find the culprit croc. Though attacks like this are rare, salties probably kill about 6 people a year. Yet officials estimate there are up to 150,000 of them moving from rural tidal rivers into Darwin waters.
The unique thing about Darwin is that it's essentially a city that's situated right in the middle of crocodile habitat.
And as they spread to urban and suburban areas, the odds of attacks on humans may be increasing exponentially.
If most crocodiles in the tidal rivers here didn't move, they'd get killed by other crocodiles. There's just not enough food and there's not enough space to go around. And this is why you've got saltwater crocodiles moving along the coast towards Darwin. And more crocodiles every year are found in and around Darwin, And obviously the potential for disaster is so much higher.
Accidental run-ins with wild crocodiles are an ever-present danger here. But there's an even more dangerous phenomenon. Rogue crocs that attack people on purpose.
Rogue crocodiles don't behave like normal crocodiles, and they represent a really very significant danger. Often rogue crocodiles are the kinds of animals which have successfully attacked someone. They realize how easy it is, and then they try and do the same thing again. And very much unlike other crocodiles, which tend to stay away from people, rogue crocodiles will try and seek people out.
Rogue crocodile is a problem crocodile.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
Nightmare on Elm Street is a bona fide classic in the same pantheon as The Exorcist, Psycho, and Night of the Living Dead.
Freddy certainly was a star, kind of the father figure who takes delight in killing innocents and delights in evil.
He became a character in American horror, the equal of Frankenstein and Dracula.
Just seemed like ancient tragedy in a way, so it felt very classical.
It was about the story, and it was a really, really good story.
This is a smart, interesting little movie. It deals with reality and fantasy blending.
It was one of my very first jobs at all. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into.
The scene in the bedroom where the girl is going up the wall. Nobody's ever really done that kind of thing before.
No apologies, nothing politically correct about it. Pushing the envelope, Wes Craven, come on down.
Gonna get you.
When I try to think of where becoming a horror film director came from, I can only speculate. First of all, I never thought of making movies until I was almost 30. I was raised in a fundamentalist Baptist church. Almost all social things of any import were really within the church. And one of the beliefs they had, besides you can't play cards and dance and smoke and drink alcohol, was that you don't go to movies because they're kind of the devil's playground. My father was buried in 45, somewhere around my 6th birthday. The few memories that I have of my father, I was really scared of him. He had an explosive temper, and you had the feeling like he could kill you at any time. It was just, one of those kind of guys. My first year in college, I came down with this very strange, unexpected paralysis. And during that time, when I came fairly close to death, I started writing poetry. That and my love of books and novels started going into writing short stories and things like that, but none of them were, about horror. Films didn't really happen until I started teaching college. We had an art theater that showed all the European films, fantastic Bergman and Fellini films, this amazing sort of fluorescence of astonishing films. That was my notion, is I want to do something like that. Quit my job. I just went to New York to figure out how to make films. The whole idea of doing a horror film never would have occurred to me. Really, it just was a matter of my having been working for this guy, Sean Cunningham, who hired me to do some syncing up dailies.
Around 1970 is when I first started to make films. I really didn't know how, and I was learning how to make all of these mistakes and how to make movies. In the middle of all of that, I meet this guy named Wes Craven. He was a rock. I mean, he was a terrific assistant, and he became a really good editor. After we had worked together for almost a year, it was like, I've got an idea, let's make a movie. We were able to get some people to put up money because of our previous relationship.
Sean said, the backers want a scary movie. Did you ever think of writing something scary? I said, no. He said, well, go write something scary, and if they like it, you can direct it. On a weekend, in 3 days, I wrote Last House on the Left. Kind of a raucous, balls to the walls, escape criminals doing horrible things movie.
The picture turned out to be very, very strong. You got to see Wes's special sensitivity for this scary, dark arena.
I don't think Sean or I thought that anybody would really see it. When it opened, it kind of created a sensation, and there were riots and protests, and people tried to get into the projection booth to destroy it. I felt like, hey, maybe we got something here.
After Last House was released, Wes felt that he had his sample reel and had a kind of a hit movie.
Actually, after Last House, I didn't make another film for I think almost 5 years, because I was trying to do other kinds of films. And then at a certain point, my friend said, I can get you money to make a scary movie, write something else scary. And that became Hills Have Eyes.
The Hills Have Eyes, another sort of strange, stark, semi-horror thing which he was able to get done. And at the same time, Wes had moved to California, was trying to make his career here and got to do a couple of movies. Wes became a successful director, but he's still haunted by this idea of going back and trying to do this special movie.
Nightmare was written after I'd done 2 films back to back. I had made enough money on them to take 6 months off. So I basically took 6 months off and wrote and refined the script, Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street as a story seems to have its roots in these articles in the Los Angeles Times. The first article was about a young man, Asian descent, dying in the middle of a nightmare. He and the family had come out of relocation camps in Southeast Asia during the time of Pol Pot, when hundreds of thousands of people were just being slaughtered. About a year later, there was a second article. Then about 6 months later, the third, and the third one just got me. That was a young man whose father was a doctor. They had come out of relocation camps. He was having nightmares, and he was telling his family that there's something after me, and I'm afraid if I don't stay awake, it'll kill me. This kid decided he was going to stay awake. Sleeping pills the father had been demanding that he take were found under his pillow. He hadn't taken any of them. And he had a coffee pot in his closet full of black coffee with a long extension cord that he had hidden behind curtains. They were all sitting in the living room watching a movie, and he just kind of fell asleep. Carried him upstairs, put him to bed, pulled the covers over him, and everybody goes, thank God. Everybody goes to bed in the middle of the night. They hear screaming. They run into his room, and before they get to him, he is dead. Oh man, I got to do a movie about that.
There are so many horror films that have used the dream motif. If we go back to The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the entire film is seen as a nightmare. They chose to make the sets distorted, expressionistic, nightmarish. But there was never a situation where a character lived exclusively in a dream world.
Since I was in college, I've been writing down dreams and remembering my dreams, so I was kind of familiar with the whole landscape. I've always felt like nightmares are the horror movies of the psyche. Conversely, horror films are kind of the nightmares of a culture. They talk about the things that our normal, rational mind or our polite society doesn't really want to bring to the dinner table. I was trying with Nightmare on Elm Street to think in archetypes. It was very much built on a system of kind of archetypical thinking and nightmares.
It was right in there that Wes started to talk to me about this character that operated in dreams and was able to cross over into real life.
Right away, I thought, you have to have an antagonist. You have to have the killer. And then it was a matter of just kind of designing him. By that time, Halloween had come out and Friday the 13th had come out, and they both were very powerful and successful films, and they had somebody in a mask. At a certain point, I thought, kill him in fire, and then he can have a mask of just scar tissue, and yet he'll be able to be articulate.
Fred Krueger, Mom. Fred Krueger.
Freddy, the name, was the name of a kid who used to beat me up quite frequently.
Where are you, Krueger?
Krueger sounded very German and reminded me of one of the big war plants in Nazi Germany, and also it was an extension of Krug, who was the lead character in Last House on the Left. Freddy's hat was exactly the hat of a man who had scared me when I was a little kid, who I think was a drunk walking down the street. He just somehow knew I was there, and he stopped and he looked right at me and just held that. It was just scared the shit out of me. His sweater colors were out of an article I read in Scientific American, that these two colors were the most difficult for the human cornea or human eye to put side by side. The claws were the sort of pièce de résistance, and it was like, well, what does he have? Does he have a knife? Does he have a sickle? I think at that time we had a cat, and I just saw the cat doing this. You know, I was like, oh, yeah, right.
You want to know who Fred Krueger was? He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood.
The worst crime imaginable to me is to harm a child. The fact that he was a child murderer and a child molester was just about the most loathsome creature I could imagine on the level of what he did. The big problem was, how do you fight somebody like that? It became a matter of having a central character, Nancy, that dared to go into the nightmares, go into his territory. That's when I started poking around lucid dreaming and that concept that you can go into a dream and be awake. And I just invented this little conceit that if you were holding something when you woke up, it would come with you back into your reality.
I brought something out from my train.
I would tell it in about a minute, and people would go, oh, I'd go see that in a second.
In the early 80s, I think Wes had his first draft of the script, and the agent had shopped it around. Most people just said, I don't know if it'll work. I just don't you have anything else? The only person that believed in it was Bob Shea. Bob was running New Line Pictures, which I think at the time was a 16mm distribution company.
At that time, Bob Shea and New Line Cinema were a tiny little, almost a storefront in lower Manhattan. That wasn't who I wanted to, make the movie for 10 cents, so it went around to Hollywood too, but nobody got it except Bob.
I said I thought that sounded fantastic because it had an element that I'm always looking for, which is something that all audiences can relate to, and everybody, of course, could relate to. Scary dreams and nightmares.
Bob absolutely believed that Wes was onto something, and he wanted a shot at the big time. The bad news is Bob didn't have any money. He spent months and months, if not years, trying to get the money together to shoot this movie.
With great pain and suffering, I will tell you that. As much the pain and suffering you go through making a film is nowhere near the pain and suffering you go through financing it. In this case, I had to raise all the money outside.
He raised the money basically, I'm sure, from his own money, and I'm sure from friends and family. And then he was looking for the major investor. Smart Egg was going to advance him $1 million for the picture. A week later, he called me and said they dropped out.
Just about 2 weeks before we started shooting, he basically said, you guys should all just go home and I'll call you if I find money. And it was like, oh man, so close,
Bob told me, go back to LA and tell everyone that they're going to have to just work for free for a while. John Burroughs, our line producer, put up his own money.
I'll use my credit card and I'll pay the crew. It was like $8,000 or $9,000.
Remember at that time, Bob has a thing about fingernails and kind of digging at them, and I looked over and they were all just bloody, and I realized the incredible amount of stress that comes from raising money and trying to get back into a picture. Somehow he found the money.
We had one final meeting with Media Home Entertainment, a guy named Joe Wolf who owned that company, and they were big home video distributors. Finally made a deal where Joe Wolf could take over the whole movie if I didn't get my commitment together in 3 or 4 weeks. I managed to go to the Smart Egg guy and browbeat him into agreeing to put up the last few $100,000.
Bob didn't like it, but he had to take it. He was stuck. We went ahead and made the picture, but Bob will always remember that he was really giving his blood. He said, John, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. The casting director was Annette Benson. She started bringing in people for Wes to talk to.
You make a lot of decisions when you start off on a film in casting that you're going to be married to, and if you make one wrong decision, it can just kill the film. Nancy was played by this young woman who walked into the casting office, Heather Langenkamp. There was just nothing pretentious about her, but she was smart. She had an open face. She had a strong face.
I remember the interview really well because it was the scene where I'm describing how my dream had this guy in it with fingernails, and I remember, making that sound.
Nancy.
I remember looking at Wes, and I could tell he really liked it.
He knew immediately that Heather was the right look because he wanted a young girl who was smart looking, obviously pretty, vulnerable, but clearly had a good head on her shoulders.
I'm into survival.
The character that I love the most and have identified with the most is Nancy Thompson. She had a great sense that she could solve problems without anybody's help at all. I try to be like her, actually. Nancy definitely was this good girl, and her best friend, Tina, you get the feeling like she just isn't going to make it.
When Wes cast me as Tina, I just completed my acting program. My agents at the time called and said, you have an audition for this horror film. The thought behind it was that I'd be the sort of Janet Leigh character, and in the first couple scenes of the film you would think that I was going to be the heroine.
That was obviously his lead. It was going to be his heroine. You found out a lot about her, and then you killed her.
The device shown just to make it clear that I'm not going to be the heroine. Obviously when I die, that's a clear indicator.
Rob was played by Nick Corey.
Guys can have nightmares too,
He was a very interesting actor. He had a lot of soul, I thought, and a lot of empathy.
I probably could have saved him if I'd have moved sooner.
He felt like he could play a character who wasn't a bad guy, but he hadn't had the breaks that everybody else had had.
Johnny Depp had never acted, and Wes liked him and liked his look.
Hi, how you doing?
It came down to three guys. Johnny Depp was one, and there was just a name. I said, well, I'm thinking of this guy, which is not Johnny. And my daughter and her friend said, Dad, Johnny Depp. Oh, he's sexy. He's so sexy. He's a dreamboat.
Sexy and hot and good looking.
His was a little bit more of a goody two-shoes character than I'm sure he was in real life. You know, he played such a pure as the driven snow kind of guy.
Why would anybody want to kill me?
Johnny had never been, to my knowledge, in front of a camera before.
I won't screw up.
He was just terrified that he wasn't doing a good job.
Woo!
You know, after we were shooting a while, I said, Johnny, you're doing great.
One of the conditions when we got the rest of our money was that we needed to have a name, at least a name or two, so that we could sell the picture foreign. We were so excited by the fact that John Saxon was willing to do it. John Saxon came on board, and he was quite a name at that time.
He was a very well-known actor, and he had been part of the Hollywood studio system before it was disbanded in the 60s.
He was a heartthrob when I was growing up in Caldwell, Idaho. He was the kind of actor that girls sent away for the 8x10 glossy.
How you doing, baby?
He played my dad perfectly, and I felt very secure at all times when I was around him and acting with him.
Ronnie Blakely played Nancy's mother.
Are you okay?
She had been in Nashville, the Robert Altman film.
Fred Krueger can't come after you, Nancy. He's dead.
Ronnie Blakely, she had an incredible life. She'd hung out with Bob Dylan, and she had been nominated for an Academy Award.
When I met Wes Craven, I was somewhat surprised to see that he was such an elegant, soft-spoken man. It was a thrill to work with him, and he couldn't have been nicer.
Are you okay? I'm okay.
I felt very close and friendly with Heather and admired her a great deal, so we hit it off very well.
We actually did spend a day or two together before the shoot where we went out and shopped for prom dresses at the Galleria, pretending that she was my mom at the mall. I loved this scene in the kitchen where she's treating me like I am crazy. She slaps me. Ronnie really slapped me. We both were very buried in that scene.
The casting of Freddie was a really big deal. I mean, it would rise and fall on Freddie. My first thought was that because of the physicality of the role, I should go with somebody who was like a stuntman. It was very quickly apparent that they were not in connection with that part of their psyche at all. And then in comes Robert Englund.
I think I'd done maybe 12 movies before I did Nightmare on Elm Street, but what happened to me was I finally stepped into television. I did this miniseries called V, which was sort of breakout for me. That was sort of my first taste of celebrity. In my hiatus from that, that's when I auditioned for Nightmare on Elm Street. My buddy smoked, and he'd ridden over with me, and I'd used some ash from the ashtray in my car, which is an old makeup theater trick, and put a little bit of circles under my eyes. It looks very, very real. You can fool people with it. I just sat there and stared back at Wes.
Wes came out of the meeting and Robert had left, and he told me, he said, you know, he said, this man can do this.
He was just full of piss and vinegar, and he just loved the role. And he said, I just can't wait to sink my teeth into this.
When Wes started shooting Nightmare, there was enormous pressure on him because he had believed in it for so long, and now it was sort of like put up or shut up. And he was working with an insufficient budget and a very short shooting schedule, trying to figure out how to do it.
I think we had something like 32 days. It was tight. It was very, very tight. You know, as a director, you just never know whether you can cram all of that, 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag.
It was a small budget movie that pretended to be a big budget movie with multi-units. We did not have a lot of time for what we had to do.
But we found very talented people who were willing to work for the money we had and were able to take a few $1,000s and turn it into a bed spurting blood or something like that.
Cinematographer was Jacques Haken, an absolute perfectionist. He wore an eye patch when he was shooting, and when we asked him why he did that, he said, because I don't want to close my eye, but I don't want any distraction, so the eye that was not to the lens had an eye patch.
He was one of these cameramen that in the screening room when we ran the dailies, he'd run up to the screen from his seat. Oh my God, look at the lighting over here in this corner. But his work was good. His work was beautiful. Wes had dreamt up all kinds of weird things, and he would get together with Haken. He and Wes were working very tightly together to get what they wanted.
We do plan shots. There's a lot of storyboarding involved, and it's very premeditated. But you still have to leave room open for free thinking. You see a hand and your eye is drawn to it. There's your close-up of the glove. And watch Robert Englund, sort of flip out in that makeup and go, where's the heat? And make sure we get that on the film.
The shooting was done at Desilu Studios, what used to be the old Desilu that some independent equipment house had purchased.
We rented the space and we actually built the whole house on the stage, first and second floor. Then we shot in West Hollywood.
There's a wonderful little street called Genesee that when you pull onto it, it's like you're in the Midwest. It just has beautiful overarching trees. So that was our exterior location.
It's a very noticeable house. I do remember it really vividly. A lot of the scenes at that front door and the rose bushes and the trellis, I do hope those people forgave us for anything that we broke.
The neighborhood was very upset at us. There weren't too many films going around on the streets in those days. Then they became interested in the picture when they saw us shooting at night and when Freddie was out walking around. Oh, look at him, there he is, I told you, what a gruesome. And so we were starting to get crowds coming around.
And then we shot in Venice, California, some of the back alley stuff.
I've often thought, I wonder what all those neighbors thought in the middle of the night, because I was screaming at the top of my lungs running down this alley.
The boiler room was a power plant of the Lincoln Heights jail. We went down and looked at the basement, and it was just perfect.
We looked at a lot of boiler rooms. Most of them were very clean and kind of, contemporary, and I wanted something very dungeon-like. And this one just fit the bill.
It was just creepy. I mean, it was clearly a place filled with so much anguished emotion. God only knows what happened in there.
All the pipes had been wrapped in this insulation, and it was all broken open, and this stuff was falling out. A year later, we discovered that the place had been closed down because it was just full of asbestos, and I realized we were all in there sucking up asbestos for like a week.
It's guerrilla filmmaking. One had to really be prepared and stay immersed in what you were doing because the whole movie is special effects.
I just kind of assumed that that's the way movies were made in Hollywood, Only lately when I see how the A-list stars are treated, and I'm like, wow, that was really low budget, wasn't it? But I had nothing to compare it to, so I was perfectly happy. We laughed a lot on the set.
In a horror movie, there's so many ludicrous things going on with the stage blood and the makeup and the melodramatic style of acting sometimes that you really have to embrace because everything around you is larger than life. You kind of got to giggle, and Wes certainly knows that and encourages a little bit of that so then you can get down to business.
Freddie's makeup, of course. Wes Craven, he gave me the original script and basically gave me a little description of what he thought Freddie should look like. I did 5 different sculptures of what I thought Freddie should look like based on burn makeups. I did a lot of research. Wes kind of mixed and matched different things on each sculpture, and then we came up with a final look. When I first showed Robert, he was just excited. It was going to be a lot of fun to play this character.
I thought, the makeup is so extensive that I need some humanity, and my eyes, my darting little beady eyes will be the humanity.
It took 3 hours. I think it was about 11 different pieces we had to glue down because I had under pieces that glued down that showed the muscle, and then over that I put melted flesh kind of pieces, and I wanted it to move independently so you'd see his muscles moving underneath. When he first got into it, it was almost like he was afraid to move around, like it was gonna fall off or something. And he goes, "This is amazing. It all holds together and it moves." And he started moving his mouth around and moving his eyebrows, and he was just all excited after that.
I remember the first time I saw Robert Englund wearing his Freddie makeup. It was so strange.
I did not know what special effects makeup could do to a person.
It was just so gruesome and so shiny and oozy.
He couldn't get out of it once he was in it. So, for example, if we ate lunch, there Freddie would be having lunch, which isn't exactly what you want to see across the lunch table.
It got very difficult for Robert towards the end because his face was nearly raw from all the makeup. It got to the point where at the end of the day, he wouldn't even wait for me to come and take it off carefully with solvents and things. He would just rip the whole mask off.
This is God.
The famous glove, Freddy Krueger's glove. The original description in the script was fairly loose.
Wes had a vision sort of in his mind of what it could do, but not how it was. He made the suggestion that it needs to be something that the guy could make himself with the things that you find in a boiler room. I did a sketch, a side view sketch of what the whole thing would look like, just to work out the geometry, how's this thing going to move, where the rivets need to be, how's it attached to the glove. And then I handed the work off to Lou Carlucci and Charlie Bellardinelli, who were two of my guys, to actually build the glove itself. We wanted to use a commercially available knife. This little Echo steak knife was the most brutal looking thing. Reground, remounted on the glove to make those long talons. I remember the first time Robert tried the glove on. First thing he did was cut himself, like everybody did, because we didn't realize that if you folded your fingers all the way, the knives went into your wrist. But then he sort of looked at Wes and got that smile on his face and went, that became his look with the glove.
Gonna get you. I really began to play with it. You know, and that would be what happened to me. I remember playing around in craft service and goofing in craft service with it, you know, putting different, you know, jujubes and marshmallows and putting jelly on it, making it look like guts and stuff like that. That's when I really got comfortable with it and really began to really get it into the frame.
It's gotta be the scariest looking thing. It just looks so homemade. It looked like something that some psychopath would have made. They had several different ones. They had sharp ones and plastic ones and non-sharp ones. And whenever Freddie would grab me, I'd say, this is the not sharp one, right? You know? And often they would forgotten to switch him out. He's like, oh no, this is the sharp one. Yeah, it caused a lot of nightmares.
It was very strange to see Robert interact with people. He went from being this nice guy and real talkative and everything, and then all of a sudden you'd hear action. You just see this whole dark cloud come over.
Big marker. Once he put it all on, he sort of got into the character. He enjoyed playing that part. He relished it.
Tina, watch this.
I could tell that there was a really strong actor playing the role. There was something there that was going to be a real-life breathing character.
Robert Englund was a classically trained actor at the Royal Academy. He really brought this character to life as if he was playing a Shakespearean role. He would practice movements that would be extremely dramatic. There's so much drama to every single line that he delivered.
What I took was Klaus Kinski. I was really impressed with his Nosferatu, and I took the thrusted neck that Klaus did on that. And then the other one was, there was a certain kind of, you know, a you dirty rat kind of swagger that Jimmy Cagney had that I wanted to bring to Freddie. Sometimes even walking crossover like a surfer walks on a surfboard or like a runway model. It gives Freddie a kind of a glide. I remember seeing there once, and Johnny and Heather were sitting there getting makeup on as if they needed it, these two beautiful young kids. And here I am, and I'm getting basted with a turkey baster full of KY jelly. I envied them. I envied them their youth. I envied their beauty. A light bulb went off. I could use this as Freddie. It was a shorthand for me to get angry.
I'm gonna split you in two.
This was a guy that knows what's in your underwear drawer. This is a guy that knows what you're afraid of. This is a guy who knows what's in your diary. This is a guy that knows your weakness and can exploit that, and that's a real violation.
Look, all better for me, but not for you.
Wes Craven had a tremendous mind for effects. He was so good. I could sit there and he'd tell me what he's going to do, and I'd say, well, we can't shoot that, Wes. We can't. Jim Doyle was our effects man. When Wes would talk to him, he'd understand.
Nightmare was a low budget movie for what they were attempting to do especially. I think we had 80 effect shots in a 90-minute film. Wes, being an experienced low-budget director at that point, was able to use the budget to his advantage.
My feeling about special effects were twofold. One, I wasn't terribly expert in it. And two, I couldn't afford them anyway. So everything was pretty much practical, which is a film term for just done physically.
We worked our way through ideas for some of these nightmares that would give him the bang on the screen.
Every scene has some really innovative effect in it. Wes was always the instigator. Any idea would be great. Okay, how are we going to make that today? The very first one was in the alleyway when Freddie's arms stretch across the alley. The idea seemed so simple, and yet the effect was so bizarre. It was just something that you weren't expecting at all.
Oh, the alley scene, yes, that was very high-tech. His arms stretching out were literally a guy on 2 garage roofs, one on each side of the alley, with a fish pole.
They were air-assisted to be able to extend, and then they were just marionetted from 2 guys with fishing pole rigs, one in each garage on each side. That's as complicated as that had to be.
Freddie's face getting pulled off, that was a puppet. I had to build a whole puppet of Robert, head and torso. I had to put his face on, but I couldn't glue it down because it had to smear off like really easy. So I just used KY jelly and just loaded it in there on the skull face.
I think it was one take, just... Much of that stuff was just very, very, very simply done.
Simple one was he wanted to have a figure pressing against the wall then showing the whole figure of the man. I said, how are we going to shoot that?
That scene, they literally, I remember at 8 in the morning, they're like, how are we going to do this? And Jim Doyle's like, well, I really think we should just go out and buy this new material. It's called spandex.
Yeah, the rubber wall that everybody thinks is rubber. I went off down the fabric store and got spandex. So then we just made a panel of it, stuck it over the bed, and pushed on it a couple times, and it was like, this might work. That would be me. That would be my face, is Freddie in that particular shot.
Nancy stirs.
I think that's my hero shot.
Freddie's got to come back. We didn't know what it would look like. I just said, just press your face against it and press your hand out. And we'll see how it looks. And we looked at it like, whoa, that's really terrific. But, you know, it cost 10 cents.
Of course, the bathtub scene, which is probably people's favorite scene, just that idea of the claw coming up through the water between my legs while I'm sleeping in the bathtub. How are we going to do this? Well, you're going to be on this little box in the bathtub, and then we're going to have Jim Doyle from underneath who's going to, stick the claw up through the bathwater bubbles. I'm like, okay, you guys have obviously thought about this more than I have.
It wasn't a difficult thing to do. We just cut a hole under the bathtub, cut a hole in the bathtub, sealed a tank below. And action. I just held my breath and just would, duck under the water when Wes said action, and I could hear him because he was right next to the wall, so I could hear him through the wall. And I just took cues from him.
Right, too high.
And had to be really, really, really careful because that was the sharp glove.
And up.
I loathe to admit that's not me between Heather's legs in the tub. That's Jim Doyle again, working 24/7.
No, get up, Jim.
Ready. Okay, Jim, ready? Take your breath.
Are you ready? As soon as he's under, I'll start. Yell action, I guess.
As you're ready, Jim. Action.
Underwater. That was all done at a pool with black plastic sheeting so that you couldn't tell how deep the pool was. It looked like it went forever down there.
We all went under that Viz Queen on scuba equipment. We all thought we were going to drown. We all just thought this is the most dangerous thing we've ever done.
There's some props that the special effects guys bring onto the set. I think Wes invents these kinds of things to just get me. I have to get over that, and it usually takes me a couple of minutes.
I was in the lab one day putting the phone together with the mouth and the mechanical tongue. It was a cable-operated tongue device, so he could make it go up or down, left and right, and pull it in and out.
It was just like a simple prop, and all it did was just that.
Then when I saw how it worked, and I saw the line that was going to be read, I knew that would become one of the most famous lines from the movie. It just had all the ingredients of being one of those great movie lines.
The thing I walked away the most from the entire film was that I felt that it was a film about blood.
No!
There was every scene was too much blood, not enough blood, the blood's not red enough, the blood's too sticky, the blood's too thin, cue the blood, more blood, less blood, splash the blood. I clearly had read it and interestingly enough, not really processed some of the more adventurous things I was going to have to do. One day on the set, a prop guy came up to me and was like, oh, now, just wanted to show you the body bag. And I'm like, all right, oh, you're showing me. That was awful, being in that body bag. Your psyche does not want to be in that bag. You hear about body bags, you're just not supposed to be in one. Also because I was sharing it with creatures. I had to stand in this bag with these things. It was just awful. I was terrified and grossed out, and I thought, this is just awful. Centipede? Wait, I don't remember reading that in the script. They shot with my face with a rubber centipede, me pushing it out, and then they used the cast face with a real centipede. I don't know what this has to do with acting. I don't think I want to do this.
The biggest thing in the picture was the revolving room.
The upside-down room that they used with Tina, who was shown to be on the ceiling. I had no idea how they were going to do that when I saw the script. I'm still not absolutely clear how they did do it on production.
It was critical that Tina's death had to be something that was completely otherworldly and completely confusing to the audience. The idea actually came from the Fred Astaire film Royal Wedding, which had a great sequence of him dancing around the rotating room. You can do that? I said, well, I think we can. So I went ahead and looked at the logistics. So, yeah, I think we can do this. We spent a month to get this thing done. Built the framework and then built the room inside of that.
All sorts of superstructure underneath because it had to kind of have a structural integrity no matter what attitude it was in.
Floors, walls, ceiling, everything is framed in 2x6s and double layer plywood because nothing can move. Every little thing had to be reconsidered. What are the decorations in the room? How are we going to nail them down when the room turns?
Everything in the room, all the curtains, anything that would flop or move was just starched to hell or pinned down. We strapped Amanda's boyfriend down to the floor. We had his hair totally lacquered. And then there were two kind of jump seats that were bolted to the wall, and the camera was bolted to the wall.
The cameraman had himself strapped into a chair, and he kept the camera on, and he went around with the room.
We turned the room by hand, me and 3 or 4 guys. It was very spooky when it was turning all by itself.
It was horrifying. I mean, it was the only scene I think I've ever been part of that was more frightening in real life. What if it falls off its hinges? Or what if somebody falls out of the hole and lands on the ground? It just seemed like so much could go wrong.
I was pretty scared going into that. I was afraid for my own physical safety because I kept thinking things were going to fall on me. I thought I was going to fall out. This has a lot of elements to it that seem really dangerous.
We shot the whole sequence and it just dragged Amanda up the wall. It just was the spookiest thing in the world. The only thing was, as soon as anybody walked into the room, they got totally nauseous because it was so disorienting.
I look up and there's the bed above me. Completely freak out. I get complete and utter vertigo and I start to feel that I'm falling. Wes's head comes through this hole in the floor and he's like, look, I'm standing on the floor. This is my head. You're on the floor. You're looking right at me.
Amanda, this is down, this is up, this is down, this is up, just before the take.
And action.
Just the most bizarre thing I've ever been asked to do. I was a mess doing the whole thing.
And then we took the same room and used it as Johnny Depp's room for the bed sequence. The part pulling him down through the bed was easy, but then when the mother comes in and sees all the blood come out, we inverted the room.
It's actually inspired by Kubrick a little bit, because The Shining had come out, and there was that scene with the blood spilling out of the elevators.
I thought if you could get away with it, I could.
Roughly 220 gallons of the blood, as we called it. This was actually made with water, with food coloring and a little bit of poster paint to make it thick. It was stored on a scaffolding above the stage.
Imagine it's like a lottery drum. There's a platform with guys waiting at the top. The drum turns, and when it hits the mark, boom, and that's the bed.
Nobody could see anything because the room was all closed. All we could hear was this thunderous pounding on the floor, which was now the ceiling, of all this blood dumping into the room. It was probably about 30 of the most exciting seconds I've had on a film set.
The stunt coordinator was Tony Caesar. He did some really hard falls. There's a scene where Freddy gets knocked by the sledgehammer and falls backward over the railing. I thought he had broken his neck for sure because his body rotated and he just turned his head sideways a split second and hit that thing like a ton of bricks. The whole plywood, which was like 3/4 inch plywood, was cracked.
His specialty was burn scenes, where he would paint his body with filament and light himself.
This guy was supposedly one of the top body burn guys in the business. This guy's nuts. He's good. He knows what he's doing.
He did what he said was the longest fire burn done to that time when Freddy was caught on fire in the basement, runs up the stairs.
I couldn't believe this guy was actually doing this. It's nuts. We're sitting there with the fire extinguishers. When is he going to stop? He rolls back down the stairs on fire. Nobody'd ever done that before. Gets up, starts back up the stairs. And we're like, okay. Finally, he went down, hot enough, and we put him out.
They put him out and he stood up and said, how'd it go? So he was pretty amazing.
At the end, as we were finally winding down, and I'm sure the money was running out, there were some days where there were some extra people on the set kind of looking at us, and I got the sense like, okay, these must be money people, and they must be nervous that we're not done yet.
In the middle of all of this, I was talking to Wes and asking him how it was going, and he was telling me about the shortage of time and money and so on, and I volunteered to come in and try to shoot second unit to pick up shots, and I said, look, just tell me what you need, and I'll go try to get the shots. You'd work for 12 or 14 or 15 hours, and you wouldn't get everything that was on the call sheet.
My day-to-day concerns were keeping people working. We had growing discontent with the crew because we were falling behind.
I asked Bob, what do I do? I've never produced before. I've never represented a studio on a production. Bob said, just keep pacing back and forth, looking at your watch, and sign.
One day, we were doing an inside scene where I was running through the alley and I'm being pursued by Freddie. Cut my foot open. And I remember Bob Shea going like, do you really have to go to the hospital and get stitches? I'm like, I think I do. Oh, this actress, God. So what? Her foot is bleeding a little bit.
The scene where Heather puts her foot in the carpet and it sinks through. That was one of my dreams, one of the horrible dreams that I had when I was a kid.
Wes said, okay, Bob, this is your idea. If you think it's so great, why don't you direct this scene?
Yeah, well, no, it was one of the times that Bob visited the set, and it was towards the end, very, very end of the shoot, and I think it was about the time he was getting ready to pull the plug. Bob was standing right behind me saying, you got to shoot, you can't do that, cut this scene. I said, Bob, why don't you direct it?
Wes deigned to let me do it, mostly because if somebody didn't do it, it wouldn't have happened, and I thought it was an important part in the movie. The ending of the film was a huge conundrum. Wes wanted Heather to come out of the house, turn to her mother and say, well, God, I had this very strange dream last night, and then go off to school. But I didn't think as a commercial matter, it was the kind of thing that was going to work. In the good horror films I'd seen, there's always a twist at the end that scares you a lot. I begged him to write some kind of twist.
There we go, ready, and action.
Bob wanted a car to pull up and Nancy to get into it and then see Freddie at the wheel. We had a lot of arguments about that.
Wes said, that's terrible. It's really bad. You're screwing up the whole thing. And so he tried, and I tried, and we all were working on different things.
It is a little disconcerting shooting all sorts of different endings as an actor. Who's in charge here? Let's just make an ending. Let's just get this over with.
Bob wanted to have a hook for a sequel. I thought it was demeaning to the picture, didn't need it, and all those things. But I have to say, was very grateful to Bob for making the picture possible. So we reached a compromise. Freddie wouldn't be driving, but the car itself would have Freddie's stripes.
And then you cut to the mother, which is one of my favorite things.
Bob, we have to have this last shot of, pulling Ronnie Blakely through the door. You don't need that shot. Give us one shot. Okay, you can have one shot. And so we rolled, and that thing just flew through that. I don't know how they did it, but, it was one take, and we were out of there. We shut down, and that was it.
The editing was done in New York. That was obviously because we didn't even have an office out here at this point.
The first time I saw the film, Bob and the editor and I sat in a screening room and they rolled the film. Film finished and the lights came up and there was a long pause, and then Bob turned around, put his arm over the chair. I'll never forget this, and looked at me and said, do you think there's a film there at all? I said, yeah. I think we cut for, 4 or 5 weeks. Suddenly this terrific film emerged.
Was intense, but very, very exciting. The big challenge was how much to show of him physically. We didn't want to overdo it in terms of the scary thing in the movie being too much in your face. Tina! And of course his voice was so good as well that he was able to create tension without seeing him.
One of the really effective things about this movie is that when you're shifting between the nightmares and dreams and actual reality, it's not that obvious.
I thought it was great what Wes was doing, because half the time I couldn't tell what was a dream and what was reality, even in the dailies. It fed in beautifully into what we tried to do editorially, which was kind of seamlessly go from reality into dreams. I think it played into the movie in a really wonderful way so that often you wouldn't quite know where you were. The sound of Freddie's fingers rubbing on metal. Wes spent quite a bit of time with the sound editors getting just the kind of sound that would make your spine tingle.
Then we hired a composer, Charles Bernstein, who turned out to be brilliant.
This was a very low-budget situation. So our early conversations were kind of about how we were going to do this thing on very little money. I suggested to Wes, maybe I'll do this thing at home, and I'll play all the instruments, and I'll sing all the parts. I think I can do this thing without an orchestra.
I want to have a theme to the music that is unmistakable and that we can have reoccurring throughout. And I'd written this little doggerel thing in the film, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, 3, 4, better lock your door. I said, maybe you could set that to music.
Da, 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 da.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
It's very thematic, but I wanted it to have a melody. Da da dee da 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 da.
We had to deal with the rating board, which made us cut some things they didn't like.
You know, I tend to block bad memories, but I do remember that the whole blood coming out of the bed had to be cut short. And I know that we had to cut short Amanda when she hit the bed. There was a big splash of blood. They made us cut that off very short. It was extremely painful to have to do that. I still, to this day, hate that sort of censorship.
I really started getting excited when we took the film to MIFED in Milan, which is a foreign film sales convention. All of the skeptical investors and home video people and all the yada, all of a sudden they would get very quiet when they walked out. Everybody had a sense that this was a film that was really going to work.
Everything is together. We've got a release date. Publicity was out and the TV spots and everything had been done. It was a big deal for us. The week before we were supposed to open, the lab we were using wouldn't release the negative because they hadn't been paid. We didn't have the money to pay them. Bob somehow worked out some kind of deal to pay the lab all of their costs. Bob got the movie made because otherwise there would have been no prints on the screen. That weekend, the film did well. I think it was #1.
Beyond any expectation. It just became a big hit. Wes was a wonderful director, and Bob Shaye is fabulous. We have a new producer in town.
It's a hit. People were lining up down Broadway to see this movie. It was like live theater. I mean, people were running down the aisles, talking to the screen.
Don't go there. Don't go up the stairs, you know, girlfriend.
Don't fall asleep. Don't fall asleep. He's behind you.
They were seeing something that they had never seen before. It was a confirmation of all these things that Wes had been trying to make people understand for years. He was so right.
As it played, its reputation grew.
All over the country. It wasn't just a New York movie or a Los Angeles movie.
Nightmare on Elm Street played for everybody in all cultures because everybody has to fall asleep at night.
It became a cultural phenomenon.
I did a show once with Robert, and as soon as Robert walked out, the kids stood up and started chanting, "Freddy, Freddy."
I have never liked him in the way that his fans liked him. I always felt like he was like the sickest, most depraved, disgusting, evil, devil character. That's what's wrong with our world. Are the Freddy Kruegers in our world.
I was watching television one night, and the President of the United States referred to Freddy Krueger.
The truth is that when you take a walk down our opposition's memory lane, it starts to look like Nightmare on Elm Street.
It's become part of the culture. You have no control over that, and it goes where it's going to go.
Through video, it had such a huge following. That's when people would come up to me, and I was like, oh my gosh.
There's millions of fans now. They just love every single moment of that film, and they've memorized every line.
This is just a dream. This isn't real.
And then there's girls who really love Nancy and are inspired by her strength. It's just amazing to me.
I don't think it's an accident that A Nightmare on Elm Street would come to be made in the mid-'80s. We had AIDS, we had an economy that was going to collapse, and in the midst of this you get this vision. All right, we're going to show you Elm Street.
It's the disintegrating middle class, the single parents and alcoholic parents and neglectful parents. Freddy's punishing white bread America.
This is a film about people being put in jeopardy by lies.
You knew about him all this time? And you've been acting like it was something I made up?
Freddy wants to destroy you because you are innocent in your youth and you have your whole life ahead of you.
Freddy kind of spits the last minutes of adolescence back in the faces of his victims.
Freddy Krueger is in everybody's mind, the boogeyman. You think of Freddy Krueger.
I always think Freddy's in the parking lot when I'm walking in my car at night. You know, I hear an elevator and I think Freddy's going to step out of it. I dream of Freddy all the time. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
Nightmare on Elm Street is a bona fide classic in the same pantheon as The Exorcist, Psycho, and Night of the Living Dead.
Freddy certainly was a star, kind of the father figure who takes delight in killing innocents and delights in evil.
He became a character in American horror, the equal of Frankenstein and Dracula.
Just seemed like ancient tragedy in a way, so it felt very classical.
It was about the story, and it was a really, really good story.
This is a smart, interesting little movie. It deals with reality and fantasy blending.
It was one of my very first jobs at all. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into.
The scene in the bedroom where the girl is going up the wall.
Nobody's ever really done that kind of thing before.
No apologies, nothing politically correct about it. Pushing the envelope, Wes Craven, come on down.
Gonna get you.
When I try to think of where becoming a horror film director came from, I can only speculate. First of all, I never thought of making movies until I was almost 30. I was raised in a fundamentalist Baptist church. Almost all social things of any import were really within the church. And one of the beliefs they had, besides you can't play cards and dance and smoke and drink alcohol, was that you don't go to movies because they're kind of the devil's playground. My father was buried in 45, somewhere around my 6th birthday. The few memories that I have of my father, I was really scared of him. He had an explosive temper, and you had the feeling like he could kill you at any time. It was just, one of those kind of guys. My first year in college, I came down with this very strange, unexpected paralysis. And during that time, when I came fairly close to death, I started writing poetry. That and my love of books and novels started going into writing short stories and things like that, but none of them were, about horror. Films didn't really happen until I started teaching college. We had an art theater that me up quite frequently.
Where are you, Krueger?
Krueger sounded very German and reminded me of one of the big war plants in Nazi Germany, and also it was an extension of Krug, who was the lead character in Last House on the Left. Freddy's hat was exactly the hat of a man who had scared me when I was a little kid, who I think was a drunk walking down the street. He just somehow knew I was there, and he stopped and he looked right at me and just held that. It was just scared the shit out of me. His sweater colors were out of an article I read in Scientific American that these two colors were the most difficult for the human cornea or human eye to put side by side. The claws were the sort of pièce de résistance, and it was like, well, what does he have? Does he have a knife? Does he have a sickle? I think at that time we had a cat, and I just saw the cat doing this. I was like, oh, yeah, right.
You want to know who Fred Krueger was? He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood.
The worst crime imaginable to me is to harm a child. The fact that he was a child murderer and a child molester was just about the most loathsome creature I could imagine on the level of what he did. The big problem was, how do you fight somebody like that? It became a matter of having a central character, Nancy, that dared to go into the nightmares, go into his territory. That's when I started poking around lucid dreaming and that concept that you can go into a dream and be awake. And I just invented this little conceit that if you were holding something when you woke up, it would come with you back into your reality.
I brought something out from my dream.
I would tell it in about a minute, and people would go, oh, I'd go see that in a second.
In the early 80s, I think Wes had his first draft of the script, and the agent had shopped it around. Most people just said, I don't know if it'll work. I just don't you have anything else? The only person that believed in it was Bob Shea. Bob was running New Line Pictures, which I think at the time was a 16mm distribution company.
At that time, Bob Shea and New Line Cinema were a tiny little, almost a storefront in lower Manhattan. That wasn't who I wanted to, make the movie for 10 cents, so it went around to Hollywood too, but nobody got it except Bob.
I said I thought that sounded fantastic because it
showed all the European films, fantastic Bergman and Fellini films, this amazing sort of fluorescence of astonishing films. That was my notion, is I want to do something like that. Quit my job. I just went to New York to figure out how to make films. The whole idea of doing a horror film never would have occurred to me. Really, it just was a matter of my having been working for this guy, Sean Cunningham, who hired me to do some syncing up dailies.
Around 1970 is when I first started to make films. I really didn't know how, and I was learning how to make all of these mistakes and how to make movies. In the middle of all of that, I meet this guy named Wes Craven. He was a rock. I mean, he was a terrific assistant, and he became a really good editor. After we had worked together for almost a year, it was like, I've got an idea, let's make a movie. We were able to get some people to put up money because of our previous relationship.
Sean said, the backers want a scary movie. Do you ever think of writing something scary? I said, no. He said, well, go write something scary, and if they like it, you can direct it. On a weekend, in 3 days, I wrote Last House on the Left. Kind of a raucous, balls to the walls, escaped criminals doing horrible things movie.
The picture turned out to be very, very strong. You got to see Wes's special sensitivity for this scary, dark arena.
I don't think Sean or I thought that anybody would really see it. When it opened, it kind of created a sensation, and there were riots and protests, and people tried to get into the projection booth to destroy it. I felt like, hey, maybe we got something here.
After Last House was released, Wes felt that he had his sample reel and had a kind of a hit movie.
Actually, after Last House, I didn't make another film for, I think, almost 5 years because I was trying to do other kinds of films. And then at a certain point, my friend said, I can get you money to make a scary movie, write something else scary. That became Hills Have Eyes.
The Hills Have Eyes, another sort of strange, stark, semi-horror thing which he was able to get done. And at the same time, Wes had moved to California, was trying to make his career here and got to do a couple of movies. Wes became a successful director, but he's still haunted by this idea of going back and trying to do this special movie.
Nightmare was written after I'd done 2 films back to back. I had made enough money on them to take 6 months off. So I basically took 6 months off and wrote and refined the script, Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street as a story seems to have its roots in these articles in the Los Angeles Times. The first article was about a young man, Asian descent, dying in the middle of a nightmare. He and the family had come out of relocation camps in Southeast Asia during the time of Pol Pot, when hundreds of thousands of people were just being slaughtered. About a year later, there was a second article. Then about 6 months later, the third, and the third one just got me. That was a young man whose father was a doctor. They had come out of relocation camps. He was having nightmares, and he was telling his family that there's something after me, and I'm afraid if I don't stay awake, it'll kill me. This kid decided he was going to stay awake. Sleeping pills the father had been demanding that he take were found under his pillow. He hadn't taken any of them. And he had a coffee pot in his closet full of black coffee with a long extension cord that he had hidden behind curtains. They were all sitting in the living room watching a movie, and he just kind of fell asleep. Carried him upstairs, put him to bed, pulled the covers over him, and everyone goes, thank God. Everybody goes to bed in the middle of the night. They hear screaming. They run into his room, and before they get to him, he is dead. Oh man, I got to do a movie about that.
There are so many horror films that have used the dream motif. If we go back to The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the entire film is seen as a nightmare. They chose to make the sets distorted, expressionistic, nightmarish. But there was never a situation where a character lived exclusively in a dream world.
Since I was in college, I've been writing down dreams and remembering my dreams, so I was kind of familiar with the whole landscape. I've always felt like nightmares are the horror movies of the psyche. Conversely, Horror films are kind of the nightmares of a culture. They talk about the things that our normal, rational mind or our polite society doesn't really want to bring to the dinner table. I was trying with Nightmare on Elm Street to think in archetypes. It was very much built on a system of kind of archetypical thinking and nightmares.
It was right in there that Wes started to talk to me about this character that operated in dreams and was able to cross over into real life.
Right away, I thought, you have to have an antagonist. You have to have the killer. And then it was a matter of just kind of designing him. By that time, Halloween had come out and Friday the 13th had come out. And they both were very powerful and successful films, and they had somebody in a mask. And at a certain point, I thought, kill him in fire, and then he can have a mask of just scar tissue, and yet he'll be able to be articulate.
Fred Krueger, Mom. Fred Krueger.
Freddy, the name, was the name of a kid who used to be...
Had an element that I'm always looking for, which is something that all audiences can relate to, and everybody, of course, could relate to. Scary dreams and nightmares.
Bob absolutely believed that Wes was onto something, and he wanted a shot at the big time. The bad news is Bob didn't have any money. He spent months and months, if not years, trying to get the money together to shoot this movie.
With great pain and suffering, I will tell you that. As much the pain and suffering you go through making a film is nowhere near the pain and suffering you go through financing it. In this case, I had to raise all the money outside.
He raised the money basically, I'm sure, from his own money, and I'm sure from friends and family. And then he was looking for the major investor. Smart Egg was going to advance him $1 million for the picture. A week later, he called me and said they dropped out.
Just about 2 weeks before we started shooting, he basically said, you guys should all just go home and I'll call you if I find money. And it was like, oh man, so close, you know.
Bob told me, go back to LA and tell everyone that they're going to have to just work for free for a while. John Burroughs, our line producer, put up his own money.
I'll use my credit card and I'll pay the crew. It was like $8,000 or $9,000.
Remember at that time, Bob has a thing about fingernails and kind of digging at them, and I looked over and they were all just bloody, and I realized the incredible amount of stress that comes from raising money and trying to get back into a picture. Somehow he found the money.
We had one final meeting with Media Home Entertainment, a guy named Joe Wolf who owned that company, and they were big home video distributors. Finally made a deal where Joe Wolf could take over the whole movie if I didn't get my commitment together in 3 or 4 weeks. I managed to then go to the Smart Egg guy and browbeat him into agreeing to put up the last few $100,000.
Bob didn't like it, but he had to take it. He was stuck. We went ahead and made the picture, but Bob will always remember that he was really giving his blood. You know, he said, John, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. The casting director was Annette Benson. She started bringing in people for Wes to talk to.
You know, you make a lot of decisions when you start off on a film in casting that you're going to be married to, and if you make one wrong decision, it can just kill the film. Nancy was played by this young woman.
Even though this impala senses something, it's compelled to drink. Thirst overrides fear, but it's braced for danger. Every muscle is hardwired for escape. Perfect strike. But can the young croc hang on? When a baby hippo dies of heat stroke on this beach, only one crocodile has the right to claim the bounty. He is the Croc Boss, the godfather of the ganglands. In crocodile hierarchy, Size is power, and for many, many years, his 1,000 kilograms has topped the scales. As biggest croc on the beach, all food is his. The other crocodiles don't have the power or rank to oppose him. The boss didn't discover this carcass. One of the subdominant males found the prize. At 3 meters long, he is no small crocodile, but he lives on this beach and feeds at the discretion of Croc Boss. All the smaller crocodiles understand the rules. They only eat if the boss allows it. All along the river, territories work the same. Sections, each as big as 4 Olympic swimming pools, are dominated by a single large crocodile and his gang. Croc Boss is the biggest of them all, but for most of the year, there is a peaceful truce between him and the other leaders. Border skirmishes mostly occur during the mating season. Smaller crocodiles may join the gang as long as they obey 3 simple rules. Croc Boss gets the best food. He is respected at all times, and only he mates with receptive females. Gang members break the rules at their peril. But there is always a younger rival, trying to get big enough to become a boss in his own right. These pretenders are shadow bosses, waiting for their moment. We call them phantoms. There have been other takeover bids. A smaller male tried to mate with one of the boss's females. It was a reckless move. The challenger's bony armor was no match for the boss's brutal bites, as powerful as a trash compactor. Discipline was swift and terminal. This Croc Boss's territory in Africa is a stretch of the Luangwa River in Zambia, in the South Luangwa National Park. It's a crocodile killing field, especially during the severe dry season. Inland lakes and pools dry up, and the river is the only water for kilometers around. All animals in the area must make long treks here to drink. And in 40-degree heat, many don't make it. The river's a lifeline and a death zone. For the croc gangs, the living is easy. Even the smaller ones get to feed. But crocs aren't the only gangs in town. Lions also know the riverbanks are teeming with easy pickings. And they're willing to fight the crocs for food. This puku antelope's caught between a rock and a hard place. After fleeing from the lions, he's stranded on an island in the croc-infested river. He's got to get off or starve. The lions won't swim after their prey. They'll wait for it to make a mistake. The puku's biggest threat lies in the water. The young phantom is perfectly placed for an attack. Away from the gang, this antelope is his to lose. There's no way the croc can catch the puku on the land. But there's no way the puku can outswim the croc. It's like a game of chess with life and death stakes. The puku has to use the land to put as much distance as he can between himself and the waiting croc, and figure out the shortest swim possible. The croc must anticipate the puku's escape route. Life boils down to a simple equation of speed versus distance. The croc submerges like a torpedo to reduce drag in the water. But his top speed of 10 kilometers per hour is not fast enough. The puku's calculations pay off. He's foiled two top predators. The young croc misses an easy kill. His solo hunting attempt is a failure. But the dry season has another food bonus on offer. Huge numbers of hippos crush together in the Luangwa's diminishing deep water holes to keep cool. No crocodile, even one as big as Croc Boss, would attack a full-grown hippo. They are way too big and dangerous to take on. A single hippo bite would destroy a big crocodile. But the crocs don't need to try to kill the hippos. In crowds like this, these aggressive 3-ton herbivores will often fight to the death. Leaving the croc gangs with a meat bonanza. A hippo carcass is one of the rare occasions when rival gang members join forces. Up to 200 crocs from different factions feed together. In fact, this cooperative frenzy serves a useful purpose. Crocs' jaws don't move from side to side. When the carcass is in water, they need others to pull against to help them rip off hunks of meat. It'll take them less than 2 days to completely demolish a 1-ton hippo. With the most acidic stomach of any vertebrate, crocodiles can digest every centimeter of a carcass. And as usual, the final chunk of meat goes to the croc boss. No other croc has the power to argue. Cooperation is officially over. Back on dry land, the lion pride is also living well off the deadly dry season. There's no need to hunt when the scavenging is so good. They rule the riverbanks just beyond the croc's reach. They own this feeding ground, and the crocs know it. Even Croc Boss won't come up here to try to take this carcass off the lions. But anything that dies closer to the water is in no man's land, and that means war. Lion versus croc. A dead elephant offers up a gigantic feast for the croc gang. They didn't kill it. The deadly dry season serves up another meat mountain. In this brutal time, even elephants are vulnerable. They need massive amounts of water, up to 200 liters a day. If they don't get enough to drink, heat stroke can quickly kill them. The crocs have the carcass now, but they don't own it. It's right in the conflict zone. The lions have started feeding on it, and they haven't finished. This prize is too big to give up without a fight. One young male wants more. His scrappy mane indicates he's barely 2 years old, but he's big and dangerous. Most of the crocs know to keep their distance. Even this immature lion can kill them. But the inexperienced smaller crocs are willing to take him on. This is not a competition Croc Boss needs to get into. The pickings are slim, and if the gang wins, the carcass is his for the taking anyway. Without backup, the young lion isn't sure of himself. The crocodiles win today. The gang now goes to work as fast as they can. It's a race to rip as much meat as possible from the carcass. The young pretender wrestles a leg joint away from the smaller gang members. Aggression, theft, and brutality are the ultimate tools for survival. In crocodile hierarchy, bigger individuals are always looking to exploit the little guy. The smaller crocs have learned well from the master. But there is only one master. Croc Boss comes to claim him.
Suffer reproduction. In the beginning, there was darkness, and then bang, giving birth to an endless expanding existence of time, space, and matter. Every day, new discoveries are unlocking the mysterious, the mind-blowing, the deadly secrets of a place we call the universe. What would happen if our moon suddenly disappeared? Global tsunamis decimate coastlines around the world as ocean waters surge toward the gravitational pull of the sun. Sea currents shift, changing weather patterns and destroying food supplies. Eventually, Earth's axis tilts wildly, turning the poles into tropical jungles and the equator into frigid wastelands. New species emerge while others go extinct. Our planet becomes unrecognizable the day the moon was gone. The moon is a barren, lifeless rock. But it plays a surprisingly important role in the story of life on Earth. How important? Let's remove it from the sky and find out. Strange things start to happen almost immediately. People on the coast are the first to notice the change.
This would probably create something like a tsunami, a tidal wave, which would be very dramatic indeed.
It's well known that the moon controls Earth's tides. As it orbits around us, its mass tugs our oceans toward it, causing a tidal bulge on the side of the planet nearest the moon. And through a strange quirk of gravitational physics, it forms a second bulge on the side farthest away from the moon. Few people realize the sun also plays a role in governing the tides. But because it's 400 times farther from us than the moon, its gravitational influence on the oceans is relatively small, about 1/3 of the total effect. But with the moon out of the picture, the sun is now in control.
With the moon up here, its gravitational pull is sort of pulling a dome of water up. There's a big sort of bulge. Then imagine you just snipped the cord and the water had to flow back out.
The water rushes toward the gravity of the sun in a massive global tsunami. The force of the waves depends on where the moon is in relation to the sun when it disappears.
If the moon vanished at full moon or at new moon, that's when the moon is lined up with the Earth and the sun.
The lunar tidal bulges would shrink to solar tidal bulges in the same spots, and the extra water from the lunar bulges would quickly flow to other parts of the globe. But there's an even more dramatic possibility.
If the moon vanished when it's at quarter moon, either first quarter or last quarter, then the moon's tidal bulge is not in the same place as the sun's tidal bulge. And so I expect you would see a very quick motion of Earth's oceans from the lunar tidal bulge to the solar tidal bulge.
Some experts believe this more drastic lateral shift in ocean water would blast coastal spots around the world. The powerful pulses would be similar to the 2004 Southeast Asian tsunami, except the waves would cause even more death and destruction, since they'd be worldwide. Two massive east-to-west and west-to-east waves would be initiated on opposite ends of the Earth. A seaside city like Miami would be pummeled by a 50-foot wall of water that would destroy most coastal buildings and sweep across the entire width of southern Florida, putting 9 million lives at risk. But with such a titanic shift of water, could there be other unpredictable results?
One can imagine that perhaps the east-west or north-south motion of that water could disrupt the currents. The Gulf Stream carries warm water from the Caribbean up to Great Britain, and it helps keep Great Britain a lot warmer than it otherwise would be, considering how far north it is. Climate is a very delicate system, and you tweak one part of it and another part responds. And then one can imagine that food productivity and the overall way of life would be dramatically altered if it were cooler in Northern Europe. The Sahara Desert is a great example of some place that used to be green and lush and now is completely a desert. Having changes with climate can really have impact on our survival.
But the biggest impact on our planet would be the changes to Earth's steady tilt, a unique feature that gives us our 4 regular seasons.
The thing that locks our planet's tilt to about 23.5 degrees so consistently is the presence of the moon that acts as a large stabilizer. If we don't have the moon anymore, we may get into a regime that's much more like Mars. And Mars, instead of being at a stable 23.5 degrees, goes through wild variations of the tilt, varying from maybe as low as 15 degrees on the low side, all the way up to something like about 75, 80 degrees on the high side.
Without the moon, our axis begins fluctuating erratically over several 100,000 years. The gravitational pull from other planets in the solar system starts wreaking havoc on Earth. Our stable seasons shift dramatically as different parts of our planet tilt radically toward the sun during some periods and away at others.
As soon as you get rid of the moon, you're stuck with this radical tilting of the axis back and forth, and therefore radical climate changes that don't happen today.
Earth becomes a very strange world as mankind struggles to adapt and survive.
If we go to a situation where we don't have that stabilization, those very small changes become very, very big. We may go to a situation where the ice becomes stable over the tropics. Imagine jungles and forests in Antarctica and ice sheets and glaciers in Central Africa. The tilt would vary on timescales of a few 100,000 years. These are timescales of ice ages coming on the Earth. We know how much of an impact that had, and humanity had a hard time adjusting to those changes as we came out of the last ice age.
It's very difficult to predict exactly what would happen to humans because we're not sure how rapidly we're able to adapt to radically changing environments.
And if our moon disappeared permanently, life in the sea and on the shore would be drastically transformed. Sharks would lose their hunting prowess, unable to track the schools of fish swarming above them in the moonlight. Crabs, used to mating at extreme low tides, become disoriented at the loss of lunar phases. Grunion, that lay their eggs during a high tide and full moon, suffer reproductive disruption. Even primitive aquatic plant life would be affected.
Many species will spend their evenings on the surface interacting with moonlight. The moon comes up, so the algae are moving up, and they're followed by all of the organisms that eat the algae and the organisms that eat them. So the whole ecology of the ocean is tuned to light. All of these organisms will be completely disrupted. None of their ecology will work because they won't have the usual sensing signals.
Millions of people would suffer from food shortages, and coastal economies would be devastated by the worldwide crash in marine life populations.
I would liken it to one of us suddenly waking up one morning and discovering we were blind or deaf. That would be a chaotic thing.
An Earth without the moon is a rudderless planet, highlighting just how critical this big rock is to sustaining life here. There are over 150 moons in our solar system, but Earth's moon is truly unique.
Our moon is unlike any of the other moons in the solar system. It is huge compared to Earth. It's about a quarter the size of Earth. And you don't see that in any of the other planets.
Because the moon is so big relative to the Earth, it's as if we're really in a double planet system. There's a crude way to think about the effect of the moon stabilizing this axial tilt of the Earth. If you notice, tightrope walkers will carry this long pole, and that gives more stability because there's mass out there on the end of the pole, and it's harder to fall off the line. So it's that same kind of thing, that the mass at a distance can affect the stability of the system.
But the moon has not always been by our side. There was a time early in Earth's history when there was no moon. A period when our planet was a strange place, with 8-hour days and a molten landscape too harsh for life. And then suffered the most violent collision in its history. It's hard to imagine, but there was a time when our Earth did not have a moon. Our planet was formed 4.5 billion years ago by accumulating and fusing large amounts of debris in the early stages of our volatile solar system. During that early period, our moonless Earth was a monstrous stew of flowing lava, molten rock, and liquid iron. Its atmosphere was filled with carbon dioxide, belched from the bowels of the Earth. Thick, heavy, and uninhabitable for life.
There was almost nothing on the planet. This was a nasty place to be. Lots of things were condensing. It was an extremely hostile place, even to rock chemistry. So the rocks were melted. Everything was a mess.
Our original Earth without its moon was an unrecognizable world.
The early Earth was a really hot place. In fact, that era of the Earth is called the Hadean, like Hades, because it was really hot. There was a tremendous amount of volcanism and a lot of impacts coming in. There was probably a lot of lightning and outgassing, both from the volcanoes and from steam.
The stability of our early solar system was not much better. It was created out of a huge disk of gas, debris, and dust that swirled around the newly formed sun.
Our early solar system was kind of like a roller derby. Everybody was generally going in the same direction, but there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of clumping and accreting and things getting flung to the inside and crossing lanes to the outside. People all spilling over each other, mashing up in the corner. It was a real mess.
Without the moon, we can only guess at the Earth's early tilt and rotation rate. That would have been determined by the multiple glancing collisions from the innumerable asteroids and protoplanets that ricocheted throughout our early solar system.
If you kind of average over the solar system, you look at all the planets and the big asteroids and make a bell curve of rotation speeds, it looks like the typical rotation speed might be 8 hours, something like that. So we could make a guess that that might have been the likely rotation speed before the moon was formed.
Then, about 10 million years after our moonless Earth began taking shape, there was a massive collision. Now widely accepted by astronomers, The giant impact theory says that a Mars-sized planet collided at an oblique angle at 25,000 miles per hour with Earth. The impactor blasted more than 70% of the Earth's molten crust into space. A giant whirling arm made up of 5 billion cubic miles of blazing rock and light metals was launched into orbit around our planet. The gravity of the larger chunks began pulling smaller particles towards them. Within 1 year, it coalesced into our moon.
The only materials that were blown out from the Earth were the crustal rocky material, and that's what the moon's made out of. And in fact, if you go to any other place in the solar system, for example Mars, or look at meteorites that come from the asteroid belt, there are certain ratios of the different types of oxygen. That ratio in other parts of the solar system is very different than what we see in the Earth. Now we fly to the moon, we get the moon rocks, we bring them back. They have exactly the same oxygen isotope ratio as the Earth. So that material came out of the Earth, and that fits this idea of an impact theory.
The energy released in the giant collision equaled a force of 6 trillion atomic bombs. That's 1,000 atom bombs for every person in Earth's current population of 6 billion people. The impactor planet that hit Earth was thought to have formed in an area of our solar system called the Lagrangian points.
These are regions 60 degrees either ahead of or behind the Earth, but at a similar distance from the Sun.
Debris can stay fixed in the Lagrangian points for tens of millions of years, locked between the gravitational influence of the Sun and Earth. But eventually, something knocked the impactor off its fixed course. That something was Jupiter.
Every time Jupiter passed by us in its orbit, it would be giving a little tug to this impactor planet. And each little tug wouldn't be very big. But if you think about, for example, having a car that's stuck in a ditch or stuck in a snowbank, how do you get that car out of the snowbank? Well, the way you do it is you rock the car. You push it a little bit, it comes back. Push a little bit more, it comes back a little farther. And this way, with a bunch of little pushes, you eventually free it. And that's exactly what Jupiter did to this impactor planet. And once it gets away from the Lagrange point, it's no longer stable and it's doomed. It's eventually going to collide with Earth.
After the giant cataclysm, the inner part of the whirling arm of ejected debris forms a clump that consists of materials from the impactor's iron core. That heavier clump recollides with Earth and is absorbed into our planet's center.
The giant impact was really the biggest thing that ever happened to Earth. What we have now is a core and a half. That makes our planet denser and our gravity stronger than it would be otherwise.
The larger molten core takes longer to cool than the Earth's original core would have. Heat is constantly pushed up and through the thin crust of the Earth, creating fissures. It's possible that this larger core helped create the sustained plate tectonic system that formed our continents, a unique planetary feature in our solar system.
As an example, Mars was much smaller, it cooled much quicker, and so it has no crustal plates.
Most critically, the collision knocks the Earth onto its current axial tilt of 23.5 degrees and speeds up its rotation from 8 hours to just 5 hours. Within a year, the Moon forms, roughly 14,000 miles away from Earth, significantly closer than its current distance of 234,000 miles.
You've got this immense moon in the sky, 15 times as big as the present moon. So think about this thing rising and rising and rising until it fills up a pretty big chunk of that evening sky. And imagine it being red because it's full of this molten lava around the surface. And imagine that looming over your head. It's mind-boggling.
The early moon's gravitational pull on Earth is roughly 200 times stronger than today because of its much closer distance. Though no oceans exist yet, the lunar tidal forces are 3,400 times more powerful. They lift and drop large crusts of molten rock to more than half a mile high twice a day. Our early planet's axial tilt stabilizes due to the moon's formation, and its mass acts as an anchor. But the Earth's spin begins slowing because the moon's gravitation creates a tidal bulge around our planet's midsection, causing a drag on the Earth's rotation.
Let the Earth be this green balloon, and here's the moon. If the Earth weren't rotating, the tidal bulge would point directly toward the moon. But the Earth is rotating pretty quickly. So in fact, the tidal bulge tends to be a little bit ahead of the direction toward the moon. That means the moon's gravity is pulling back on the Earth's bulge a little bit, retarding its rotation ever so slightly.
But the tidal bulge on Earth also has a reactive force on the moon.
This tidal bulge pulls the moon ahead in its orbit. It's constantly trying to tug the moon faster. But the moon doesn't want to go faster in its orbit. Instead, what happens, if you imagine throwing a slingshot and swinging it faster, it wants to go out. And that's what the moon does. It goes outward because it's being tugged faster in its orbit. So gradually over the years, the moon is moving farther and farther out.
The complex gravitational dance between the two partners is now pushing the moon away from Earth at a rate of 1.5 inches per year. Over billions of years, the moon's recession has slowed the Earth's rotation from 5-hour days to our 24-hour day today.
The whole idea of this rotation of the Earth being influenced by the moon is a little bit like what you see when a figure skater is spinning, and when she pulls her arms in close and spins, she spins faster. And she throws her arms out to slow down. And this is all what the physicists would call angular momentum. But it's the same idea. As the moon moved out, it's kind of like throwing those arms out, and that slows down the rotation in the whole system.
But what if the giant impact had never happened? The changes to Earth would be even more drastic than if the moon now suddenly disappeared. Today, would we recognize an Earth that never had a moon? And would humans even exist? If the moon disappeared instantly, Earth would undergo changes like possible tsunamis, a shift in ocean currents, sea life extinctions, and eventual massive climate swings. But if the moon had never existed, Earth would be unrecognizable to anyone today.
Without the moon, life on Earth would probably look quite different. In particular, humans might well never have come into existence.
About 150 million years after a moonless Earth forms, 4.5 billion years ago, it moves out of its hot molten phase and begins cooling. The day is only about 8 hours long.
If we had an 8-hour rotation period, we'd have 4 hours of daylight, 4 hours of night. The nights would be totally black if we don't have a moon.
Once cooled, our planet is temperate enough to retain water. Heat escaping from Earth's core drives steam and carbon dioxide beyond the surface, creating a thick atmosphere.
Over a period of time, many years, all of that atmosphere would have kind of collapsed back out, and then as it cooled, the oceans would have formed in torrential rainstorms.
Icy asteroids continually pummel the planet, bringing in another large source of water. With a smaller, cooler molten core, there are probably no plate tectonics. and therefore no large mountains and huge ocean basins. Water soon covers most of the planet's more uniform crust.
We certainly would have a higher sea level than we have today, less continental area, and that would be a different world. Our blue marble would be even bluer.
Ironically, even with all that water, the early moonless Earth would have smaller tides. Determined only by the gravitation of the sun, they would be just 1/3 the size of our current tides. The range between high and low tide would remain constant throughout the year and would occur at exactly the same time each day.
And that means the intertidal regions would have been narrower, probably leading to less diversification of life and perhaps even impeding the progress of life from the oceans to the land, because it's in the intertidal regions where creatures had to develop the ability to survive both in the water and on land.
With an 8-hour